The scorched plains of Terra stretched endlessly beneath a bruised orange sky. The once green farmland, now nothing more than blackened ribs of earth jutting through ash. Caleb Reynolds moved across the ruined fields with the slow, steady determination of a man who had learned long ago that stopping hurt more than going on. His boots crunched over charred soil as he guided his chestnut stallion, Brutus, toward the water trough, a shallow wooden basin that had survived the bombardments, only because he had rebuilt it a dozen times. Caleb's broad shoulders rose and fell with controlled, disciplined breaths. Grief had carved deep lines at the corners of his eyes, but it had not broken him. 3 years of war had taken everything except his will to endure. His farm had burned. His family had died. But still he tended the land as if survival itself were an act of defiance. He dipped the wooden bucket into the ration barrel, lifting it with muscled arms hardened by years of plowing fields that would never yield again. "Easy, boy," he murmured to Brutus, setting the bucket down. The horse nudged him with a quiet whinny, sensing the same tension Caleb felt prickling beneath his skin. The distant hum came first. Low, vibrating, unnatural. Caleb froze. He had heard that sound too many times, before the sky tore open, before the bombs fell, before screams replaced the wind. But this hum was different, closer, sharper, almost surgical in its precision. Caleb didn't run. Running was pointless. If they wanted him dead, he would never make it 5 steps. Instead, he straightened, shoulders squared, jaw set, and faced the horizon as a sleek scout vessel broke through its camouflage shimmer and descended with predatory grace onto his land. Dust spiraled around its landing gear. A hatch split open, and armored soldiers marched out with mechanical synchrony, the cold choreography of conquerors. Then she appeared, tall, regal, and carved from an authority so absolute that the soldiers seemed to orbit her presence. Commander Vera Volcaris strode across the ruined field. Her deep azure skin drank in the dying sunlight, her silver-white hair flowing like liquid metal over battle-worn armor adorned in gold. Her pale eyes fixed on Caleb with a contempt so sharp it cut more cleanly than any blade. She stopped several paces from him, chin raised in imperious expectation. "Human," she said, her voice a melodic command. "You stand on territory now claimed by the Astral Dominion. Identify yourself." Caleb didn't flinch. "This is my farm," he said quietly. "What's left of it? Name's Caleb Reynolds." Her gaze hardened. To her, he was a primitive trespasser on his own land. The Dominion did not negotiate. It declared. Caleb looked down at the bucket of water-precious rationed, barely enough for his animals, and then back at the commander, who clearly expected obedience. Instead, he bent down, lifted the bucket, and held it out toward her. "Water?" he offered simply. A stunned silence fell. Soldiers shifted, hands tightening on weapons. Vira's expression twisted with confusion that quickly sharpened into disgust. "No filthy human has ever dared offer me something like this." She spat, as if the very idea insulted the foundations of her empire. Caleb shrugged, unfazed. Without breaking eye contact, he raised the bucket to his lips and drank deeply, letting water spill down his chin and dampen his dirt-stained shirt. When he finished, he lowered the bucket with steady hands. "Suit yourself," he murmured. Something flickered in Vira's eyes, a fracture in her carefully sculpted disdain. Not fear, not submission. Something far more dangerous to a Dominion officer. Curiosity. She studied him as if recalibrating her understanding of the species she'd been taught was beneath notice. "Hold position," she ordered her squad, voice tight with something even she didn't recognize yet. "This one interests me." And in that moment, with ash drifting like snow around them and the sun bleeding out behind ruined fields, The first crack formed in Vyra Valkyries' imperial worldview sparked, not by weapons or resistance, but by a human who refused to bow. Night settled over the ruined fields, like a shroud as the alien encampment unfolded with mechanical precision. Blue lights casting eerie halos across the desolate landscape, while Caleb tended to his horses under watchful armored eyes, pretending not to notice the way Commander Vyra Valkyris kept glancing toward him, as if trying to decipher a foreign language carved into human skin. Her disciplined facade remained intact, but beneath it, a fracture widened curiosity where there should have been condescension, hesitation where doctrine demanded indifference. When she finally approached him at dusk, the fire crackling between them illuminated the subtle luminescent patterns on her azure skin, freckles that shimmered faintly like distant stars. She regarded him with an intensity born not of threat, but of fascination, as though she were examining an anomaly rather than a man. "Your response to our arrival was unexpected," she said, lowering herself onto a weathered log with a grace that belied her battle armor. Her voice less rigid now, the edges softened by something dangerously close to respect. Caleb offered her a piece of dried meat, amused when she inspected it as if unsure whether it was sustenance or insult. Finally, she bit into it, surprise flickering across her silver eyes. "Most species flee or attack when confronted with Dominion forces," she continued, searching his face. "Would either have worked?" he asked, watching the firelight dance across her features. "No," she admitted, the corner of her mouth twitching with reluctant honesty. "But that does not explain your composure." Caleb turned the piece of wood in his hands, his gaze drifting to the shadows beyond the encampment. "When you've lost everything that mattered," he said quietly, "there's a strange kind of freedom in having nothing left to lose." She studied him with a depth that felt almost invasive, her silver pupils narrowing. "Your family?" "Gone," he replied without breaking. "Parents in the first wave. My sister and her husband in the second. This land? It's all that's left of them." Vyra's posture shifted. Not out of pity, Dominion commanders were not trained for such sentiments, but something akin to recalibration, as if she were reassessing not only Caleb, but the entire species she had been ordered to view as inferior. "Our intelligence reported this planet held only primitive life," she murmured, almost to herself. "Minimal resistance, limited development." Caleb let out a bitter breath that passed as laughter. "Your scouts met our military. What was left of it?" Her jaw tensed. "Then our assessment was flawed. That's one way to put it." Silence settled again. But it wasn't hostile, more like two galaxies brushing edges, trying to understand where one ended and the other began. "Why did you offer me water?" she asked suddenly, turning her gaze back to him, "when you clearly need it for yourself." Caleb looked at her, really looked, past the armor and authority and conditioning. "My father taught me something simple. Strength isn't domination. It's generosity when you don't have much to give." Her expression flickered confusion, disbelief, something softer hidden beneath. "On my world, such behavior is seen as weakness." "Maybe that's why your empire keeps fighting," he replied. Her gaze snapped to his, but instead of anger, she found only unshakable truth in his steady blue eyes, and it unsettled her more than any act of rebellion could have. Before she could respond, the air vibrated with the arrival of a new shuttle, its engines humming with authority. Vyra stood immediately, armor tightening across her frame as duty reclaimed her posture. "Admiral Thorax," she announced in a tone colder than the night, as a towering figure descended the ramp. His ridged face twisted into a scowl of disdain the moment he spotted Caleb. The Admiral's presence warped the air, dominance radiating from him like heat. And his booming voice shook the encampment as he questioned Vyra's irregular reports, his suspicion growing as he circled Caleb like a predator, analyzing prey. When he ordered Caleb subjected to Dominion testing protocols, Caleb met Vyra's gaze steady, grounded, unafraid, and in that brief exchange, something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that the events unfolding were no longer just military procedure, but the beginning of a fracture large enough to reshape both their worlds. And when Vyra stepped forward, subtly positioning herself between Caleb and the Admiral's calculating glare, Thorax did not notice the significance, but Caleb did. She was no longer observing a curiosity. She was beginning to question everything she had ever been taught. Caleb stood in the center of the Dominion testing arena, once his family's wheat field, now twisted into an alien crucible of humming machines and cruel intentions, as Admiral Thorax barked orders with cold efficiency, his ridged face contorting with satisfaction each time. Caleb faltered under gravity fields that tripled his body weight or mental tests, designed to break the mind of any primitive. Yet through every grueling trial, Caleb remained upright, breath ragged but spirit unbowed, and Vyra watched from the platform above with a tension she could no longer hide. Each bead of sweat slipping down Caleb's neck, each tremor in his exhausted muscles, carved deeper cracks into the Dominion conditioning she had worn like armor all her life. When Thorax demanded the tests continue beyond safe limits, Vyra stepped forward, citing protocol in a tone sharp enough to cut steel, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a protective instinct she did not yet understand. And it was this defiance, this moment where she chose truth over obedience, that seeded the rebellion, taking root inside her heart. After hours of brutality disguised as assessment, Thorax finally ordered Caleb, prepared for transport to his flagship, a sanitized phrase that meant dissection, experimentation, destruction. Caleb heard the sentence with a chilling calm, but Vyra's eyes widened with a shock she could not hide, her pulse rippling through the bioluminescent freckles across her cheeks in patterns no Dominion officer should ever display in public. That night, as the encampment settled into rigid formation beneath the metallic glow of alien floodlights, Vyra found Caleb alone near the remnants of his collapsed barn, still breathing hard from the trials, but alive in a way that defied every Dominion expectation. She joined him in the shadows, her voice low, trembling, almost human. "Thorax will take you tonight," she whispered, glancing back toward the perimeter where her soldiers, some loyal, some watching her with growing uncertainties, stood like statues carved from obedience. Caleb gave a tired laugh, the sound fractured but brave. "Not surprised," he muttered. "Felt like today was the warm-up." But Vyra shook her head, stepping closer, the glow beneath her skin pulsing in a rhythm that responded to emotions she had never permitted herself to feel. "I cannot allow it," she said, as if confessing treason to the wind. "Your death serves nothing. Your survival matters." Caleb saw the conflict in her, the commander battling the woman inside her, and something softened in him unexpectedly. "You don't owe me anything, Vyra." Her jaw tightened. "That is where you are wrong." For the first time she used his name without contempt, without distance, and the night seemed to still around them. She explained in hushed urgency that Thorax had already issued silent retrieval orders, that his elite squad would arrive within minutes, and that the Dominion had no intention of honoring protocol or restraint. Caleb processed it all with a weary clarity, running a hand through his dirt-streaked hair as the truth settled. He had survived the war, the bombardments, the losses, only to die as a specimen on a cold alien table. "There's an escape route," Vyra said, leaning closer, her silver eyes reflecting firelight and something softer, something forbidden. "I can disable the perimeter sensors for exactly 40 seconds. My lieutenant will look the other way for 20. It will be enough if you trust me." Trust. The word felt heavy between them. Dangerous, transformative, and yet Caleb nodded. Not because he was desperate, but because something in her voice, fragile beneath years of discipline, made him believe she meant it. Together they slipped through the shadows, her movements sharp and precise, his steps grounded and sure despite exhaustion. Alarms hummed in the distance as the retrieval team descended early, forcing them to press closer against the rocks at the field's edge. Her hand brushing his in a fleeting contact had ignited a strange, electric awareness neither dared acknowledge. When the first searchlights pierced the darkness, Vera pushed him toward the ridge, whispering, "Go, your freedom is the only truth I trust tonight." But Caleb grabbed her wrist, refusing to leave her behind in the path of Thorax's wrath. "Not without you," he said, and for a split second her composure melted, tenderness flickering in her luminous eyes, before she allowed him to pull her with him into the cave system hidden beneath the land he once farmed. As the Dominion's shouts echoed above them, and the stone swallowed their footsteps, the truth became undeniable. Neither was running alone anymore. And this escape was not merely survival. It was the first irreversible step toward a future that neither empire nor war had ever prepared them to face. The river carried them farther than Caleb anticipated, its current dragging them through twisting channels until the roar of water drowned out the distant sounds of Dominion pursuit. And when they finally dragged themselves onto the muddy bank of an unfamiliar ravine, breathless and soaked, it was not the quiet shelter of an abandoned mining town that greeted them, but the looming silhouettes of watchtowers, camouflaged barricades, and armed human sentries who emerged from the shadows with weapons trained on their dripping forms. Caleb's pulse jolted with disbelief as he recognized the weathered face at the front, Colonel Harris, a man he'd believed dead in the war's earliest days, who stared back at him with equal parts shock and suspicion before barking, "Stand down. That's Reynolds, he's one of ours," only to narrow his gaze immediately at Vera, whose shimmering bioluminescent patterns flickered in response to the threat. Her posture tall, defiant, yet undeniably vulnerable in this human stronghold where she stood alone. As they were escorted through a series of fortified tunnels carved deep into the rock, Caleb felt the tensions coil tighter around Vera like unseen wires. She watched every human with a soldier's instinct. But beneath her composed exterior, her glow dimmed and brightened in patterns. He had begun to recognize fear, calculation, uncertainty, and it struck him how profoundly she had committed to a path no Dominion officer should ever walk. Inside the Resistance war room, salvaged alien consoles hummed beside cracked human monitors, their mismatched lights illuminating grim-faced survivors who shifted uneasily at the sight of Vera. And Caleb stepped instinctively closer to her, placing himself between her and the drawn weapons as Harris rounded the table and demanded an explanation. What followed unfolded like a storm contained in too small a room. Vera, voice steady, though her hands tightened behind her back, explaining Thorax's violations. Harris countering with centuries of alien atrocities. Caleb arguing that Vera had risked her life for him, that she had broken from her empire by choice, that she was the only being alive who could expose Thorax to the Dominion High Command. The tension shattered when Dr. Stevenson, a thin, sharp-eyed scientist streaked with exhaustion, rushed forward with a tablet, displaying data that changed the entire room's temperature. Geological scans of the ravine, showing dense concentrations of an unassuming crystal the Resistance called territ, a mineral harmless to humans, but catastrophic to Dominion physiology, capable of destabilizing alien regeneration and short-circuiting their tech. "This is why Thorax wants him," Stevenson said, pointing at Caleb, whose brows furrowed in confusion. "Your species' immunity to territ makes you the perfect test subject. He wants to engineer a countermeasure before humans weaponize it." The revelation hit Caleb like a blow, but it hit Vera harder. Her eyes widened, luminescence flaring in shock, and she stepped close to the holomap, tracing the mineral fields with trembling fingers as she whispered, This could end our occupation. It could force a retreat across the entire planet." Harris crossed his arms, his expression grim. "We don't have the manpower to deploy it effectively. And even if we did, it won't stop Thorax. He's coming. He's sending everything he has." Vera lifted her chin. A spark of the commander she once was flickering alive, but now driven by purpose rather than conquest. "I can contact the Dominion High Command," she said. "If they see Thorax's violations, his obsession, his illegal experiments, they will recall him. They cannot allow a rogue admiral to jeopardize the Dominion's stability. But—" She hesitated, glancing toward the reinforced ceiling where alien scanners probed from above. "The turret in these caves blocks long-range transmissions. We need a clear line to the sky." Harris grimaced. "The surface communications tower. Thorax will hit that first." Caleb stepped beside Vera without hesitation, his voice firm. "Then we get there before he does." Vera turned her gaze to him, soft, uncertain, luminous in a way no Dominion soldier had ever been. And for a brief heartbeat, the war room seemed to fade around them as she whispered, "Why do you risk so much for me?" Caleb's answer was simple, quiet, devastatingly human. "Because you risked everything first." Around them, humans and alien officers exchanged wary glances, knowing that this fragile alliance might be the only thread holding back extinction. And as the alarms began to blare signals of incoming Dominion forces closing in, faster than expected, Vera met Caleb's gaze with a fierce, unspoken vow. They would face whatever came next together, not as conqueror and conquered, but as two souls bound by the impossible truth that the fate of their world, and perhaps the galaxy, now rested in their joined hands. Dawn broke in a violent blaze of orange as Dominion warships ripped through the clouds, their engines screaming across the valley while the resistance scrambled into defensive positions around the communications tower, an improvised spire of welded human steel and salvaged alien technology, jutting from the cleft side like a desperate plea to the hill. Heavens and Caleb, pulse hammering, raced alongside Vera as she guided a tactical squad through the labyrinth of rocky outcrops, her voice sharp and commanding in a way that told Caleb she had fully reclaimed her warrior instincts, but now wielded them for a cause none of her people would ever have imagined. The ground shook as the first volley of alien fire struck the valley floor, turret-enhanced shields flaring bright green around human barricades, and the air filled with the crackling hiss of ion bursts colliding with mineral-infused armor plating. The resistance fought like cornered wolves, fierce and unyielding, while Dominion soldiers pushed forward with relentless precision, their movements as synchronized as a single organism commanded by Thorax's monstrous will. Caleb and Vira pushed upward along the tower scaffolding, metal beams vibrating beneath their feet as explosions rocked the structure. Below them, human fighters fell and Dominion squads advanced, but the turret field slowed the aliens just enough for Caleb to pick them off with practiced shots, his rifle humming with unstable power that felt like holding lightning in his hands. Higher up, Dr. Stevenson worked frantically to stabilize the broadcast array, her fingers flying across alien consoles, while Vira barked status updates and rerouted power through Dominion circuits she had once mastered as a commander. Sweat trickled down her temple, glowing faintly as it traced across her bioluminescent markings. And Caleb caught a glimpse of the fierce determination in her eyes. This woman was no longer running from her empire. She was confronting it. Then Thorax arrived. His personal shuttle crashed down beside the tower in a shockwave of dust and fury, and the Admiral emerged encased in reinforced battle armor, towering over his soldiers like a god of war sculpted from obsidian and rage. When he spotted Vera on the tower platform, his ridges flared in fury, and his voice boomed across the battlefield. "You betray your blood for a primitive? You shame the Dominion with your weakness." Vira stepped forward, shoulders squared, hair whipping in the wind as the tower swayed under another blast. "No, Admiral," she shouted back. "I honor the Dominion by upholding the protocols you shattered." Thorax aimed a massive energy cannon at her, the weapon whining as it built lethal charge. But Caleb lunged, firing a burst that struck the Admiral's side and forced him to divert his shot. The bolt slammed into the transmission console, sparks erupting as Stevenson cried out, "I can still salvage it, just keep him away." What followed was a desperate, breathless chase across the skeletal beams of the tower as Thorax pursued Caleb with terrifying speed. Each stomp shaking the structure, each blast peeling metal apart in molten strips. Caleb ducked, dodged, improvised, leveraging his smaller size and farmer's instincts to stay alive, buying precious seconds, while Vyra finished the transmission. "It's done," she shouted, voice fierce with triumph. "The High Command has seen everything." Thorax roared in denial and turned his cannon toward Vyra. Murder carved into every ridge of his monstrous face, but Caleb charged without hesitation. Slamming the turret blade Harris had given him into a joint in Thorax's armor. The Admiral screamed as the mineral's radiation surged through him, his body convulsing as the weapon discharged harmlessly into the sky before he staggered backward, metal groaning beneath him, and toppled off the tower in a thunderous crash that sent shockwaves through the valley. And in the aftermath, two sudden Dominion ships froze mid-fire, their lights dimming as a booming transmission echoed from orbit, ordering an immediate ceasefire. One by one, enemy weapons powered down, and human fighters stared in stunned disbelief as their invincible conquerors retreated before their eyes. Vyra ran to Caleb, gripping his shoulders, her glowing markings pulsing wildly as she whispered, voice breaking, "You could have died." Caleb managed a tired, crooked smile. "Suit yourself. Next time let the giant homicidal alien shoot you instead." She laughed, a sound fierce and bright against the smoking dawn, and pulled him into her arms as the battlefield shifted around them. No longer a place of ending, but the beginning of something unthinkably new. Smoke drifted gently across the valley as Dominion ships ascended into the brightening sky. Their retreat, a spectacle no human had dared dream of only days before. And Caleb stood on the battered tower platform with Vyra at his side, both bruised and breathless, watching the impossible unfold while below them resistance fighters began moving among the wounded, embracing survivors, salvaging equipment, and staring upward with a mixture of awe, grief, and a fragile, dawning hope. It felt as though the entire world exhaled at once, releasing years of terror into the morning air. Vyra's hand slid into Caleb's with quiet certainty, her skin warm despite the faint glow still rippling across her bioluminescent markings. And she looked toward the horizon, where her people's ships dwindled into distant pinpricks of silver. "It's over," she whispered, though her voice trembled with the weight of everything that came next: exile, uncertainty, a future unbound from the empire that had shaped her. Caleb turned to her, brushing a thumb gently across her cheek, where soot smeared the luminescent freckles in broken constellations. "For now," he corrected softly, "but endings aren't the same as peace. We've still got a world to rebuild." She leaned into his touch, marveling at the simple intimacy of it, something no Dominion protocol had ever prepared her for. Then stepped back as Colonel Harris approached, boots crunching over shattered metal. His weary eyes regarded Vyra with a mixture of suspicion and respect. She had, after all, been the key to their survival, and he cleared his throat before saying, "The Dominion flagship just transmitted confirmation. Total withdrawal. High Command removed Thorax from their records. They're calling his actions a disgrace to the Empire." Vyra's jaw tightened, not out of guilt, but out of the bitter understanding that she, too, would now be erased from those same records. "And you?" Harris asked, arms crossed. What do you plan on doing now that you've torched your entire career and sided with the people you once conquered? The question hung heavy in the cool morning air. And Vyra's gaze drifted over the valley. The wounded carried on makeshift stretchers. The resistance soldiers mourning their fallen. The land still charred, but no longer conquered. Finally, she turned to Caleb, and the answer revealed itself not in words, but in the softening of her expression. "I will stay," she said at last, her voice steady. "If your people will have me. There is much knowledge I can give: technology, defenses, a way to ensure the Dominion never returns." Caleb's hand found hers again, grounding her in a way she hadn't known she needed. "We'll take any help you're willing to give," he said. "And you already know where you're welcome." Her lips curved into a faint smile, but before the moment could settle, a sharp tone crackled through the tower's damaged speakers. Dr. Stevenson rushed forward, tablet in hand, eyes wide. "Incoming transmission from the Dominion flagship," she announced. "It's not a recall order. This is directed specifically at Commander Valkyries." The use of her rank struck like a blow. Vyra stiffened, lifting her chin as the holographic screen flickered to life, revealing a stern-faced Dominion official framed by the cold metallic architecture of the council chamber. "Former Commander Valkyries," the hologram intoned, its voice echoing across the battered tower. "Your transmission has been reviewed. Admiral Thorax's violations are confirmed. The Dominion acknowledges your service." Vyra blinked in surprise. Acknowledgement was not exile, not condemnation. It was something else. "We have one more directive," the official continued. "A scientific delegation will arrive within the cycle. The Dominion wishes to investigate the human trait responsible for breaking your conditioning." The world around Vera seemed to tilt. Conditioning. Broken. Investigate. Caleb's breathing stilled as the implications settled between them like a weight no weapon could match. They wanted to study humanity, not as enemies, but as an anomaly, a threat, or perhaps something more dangerous, a force capable of reshaping the Dominion from within. The hologram vanished. Silence swallowed the tower. Vyra turned to Caleb, her silver eyes luminous with fear, wonder, and a dawning realization that made her markings flare in brilliant pulses. "Caleb," she whispered, voice trembling, "this is not the end of the war. This is the beginning of something the Dominion cannot understand." Caleb stepped closer, resting his forehead against hers, in a gesture far more powerful than any battle cry. "Then we face it together," he murmured. "Suit yourself," she whispered back, a soft, trembling laugh escaping her as she wrapped her arms around him while dawn rose over a wounded but unbroken world. Two souls, once enemies, now standing on the edge of a future that might save or shatter the galaxy, bound by a simple act of kindness that had changed everything.